Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Some fantastic panelists, Max Alvarez and Marshall Kosloff. Those two guys always make me think. We've got Brianna Joy Gray on. She's going to be talking about Elizabeth Warren's new book. I think it's called, Persist, I think is what it's called.
Cringe.
Gideon Lewis Krause is also going to be here. He wrote a big piece for The New Yorker on UFOs and how the U.S. military came to sort of come out with at least some of what they have been witnessing there. But we wanted to start with Dr. Fauci getting pressed here by members of Congress.
That's right. And so, look, I want to preface this with, I don't like Rand Paul. I wish he wasn't the guy who's doing this. But he is. He also happens to be a doctor and actually did a legitimate line of questioning with Dr. Fauci over gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab, whether the United States was complicit in funding that. Very interesting exchange. I'll dissect it on the other side. Let's take a listen.
We do not fund.
Do you fund Dr. Barrett's gain-of-function research?
Dr. Barrett does not doing gain-of-function research, and if it is, it's according to the guidelines, and it is being conducted in North Carolina, not
You don't think
in
inserting
China.
a bat virus spike protein that he got from the Wuhan Institute into the SARS virus is gain-of-function?
That is
You would
not-
be in the minority because at least 200 scientists have signed a statement from the Cambridge Working Group saying that it is gain-of-function.
Well, it is not. And if you look at the grant and you look at the progress reports, it is not gain-of-function, despite the fact that people tweet that.
So
they
do you
write
still
about it.
support sending money to the Wuhan Virology Institute?
We do not send money now to the Wuhan
Do you
Virology
support
Institute.
sending money? We did under your tutelage. We were sending it through EcoHealth. It was a sub-agency and a sub-grant. Do you support the money from NIH that was going to the Wuhan Institute?
Let me explain to you why that was done. The SARS-CoV-1 originated in bats in China. It would have been irresponsible of us if we did not investigate the bat viruses and the serology to see who might have been infected.
There's a lot going on there, Krystal, but I think the most important one is this, is that Fauci, in that clip, is trying to define gain of function in a way that doesn't include all of the research that they did fund and which was created, which may have led to a lab leak. Now, once again, I don't know if that's true. We don't honestly know either way. There needs to be a lot more investigation, but I find that a very lawyerly and stunningly dishonest, frankly, way in order to answer that question. Because you're like, well, yeah, we funded this research, which scientists say is dangerous and which the U.S. government had put a ban on, but it's not called gain of function. That's not how we're defining it. So therefore, in that exchange, he repeated over and over and over, we did not fund gain of function research. And that's enough for CNN, but if you listen, what did he admit? Yes, we did fund the Wuhan Institute of Virology, SARS-CoV-1. He explicitly, what he's talking about there with studying bat coronaviruses, that's gain-of-function research by any standard definition, as Rand Paul cites, with a huge consensus in the scientific community around this. So he's playing word games, really, here, and I think it's just absolutely dishonest. It's not just me saying this, it's a lot of people who analyze the issue.
Yeah, so he's trying to parse it in a very lawyerly well. What we technically were doing was not what I would consider gain-of-function research. And just to back up for a second, for people who haven't been immersed in all the details of this is significant in getting to the bottom of whether coronavirus, as has been asserted and enforced by the media narrative, emerged from the wild, evolved from probably starting with a bat, something that is possible, although there are a lot of barriers to that, and they haven't been able to track it back to the progression through animals where that virus would have mutated to be, so the human population would be susceptible to it. So that's one theory. The other theory is the lab leak theory. For a lot of reasons, that theory has been sort of pushed down mainstream conversation. One of them is because Trump was pushing this theory and sort of insinuating that China did it on purpose, which that part is not true whatsoever. No evidence of that part whatsoever, but because it was a Trump thing, the media was very susceptible to when the scientific community came in and said, nothing to see here, definitely not a lab leak, definitely came from the wild. Well, as you start to pull the thread there, you begin to realize why some parts of the scientific community were so quick to discard that potential theory. One of those reasons is because a lot of them were implicated in the type of research that could have led to a lab leak. That type of research is called gain of function research. That's why they're having this fight right here. Then the public record started to emerge that, oh, lo and behold, Dr. Fauci and the NIH had given grants to this very lab to conduct this type of research. So then you start to understand why there would be a lot of sensitivity around even going down the line of inquiry of whether it could have leaked from the lab. And again, no one knows for certain, but all that anyone really wants is a serious non-political investigation into what the origins actually were, because that has obvious implications for avoiding the next pandemic and whether this type of research should be supported and moved forward with at all, given the fact that even putting COVID-19 aside, there are lab leaks from this type of research literally every single year.
Yes.
So it is very dangerous research. We know that. Did it contribute to the coronavirus pandemic? That's the piece that we really need to get to the bottom of. So that's why Fauci is so defensive here and why he is trying to parse the word so carefully to make sure that it's clear, like, I'm not implicated in this whatsoever. That has nothing to do with me. We weren't funding that type of research, so there's nothing to see here. Now, the positive thing that I'll say out of this testimony is he and the Biden administration have been open to investigating whether it could have been a leak from the lab. So that's the positive side of the testimony, but this particular moment was really weaselly.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I think one thing to add on top of this, which is that Dr. Fauci himself is the chief proponent within the U.S. government of gain-of-function research.
Yeah.
So in 2017, he actually reversed an Obama administration ban allowing gain-of-function research to occur, and according to their own National Institute of Health guidelines, did not follow safety reporting protocols around the specific grant to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which also was cited in 2018 for not having substandard safety protocols. Yeah. All of that on the table. I know it can sound complicated, but the reason that it matters is because Fauci and the rest of the scientific community's response to COVID has been, we need more gain-of-function research. They're starting something called the Global Virome Project, which was going to fund $1.2 billion more of this research. That's exactly, in my opinion, the opposite of what we should do if COVID did come from a lab. And I think you can again see some of this lawyerly behavior on display when Fauci was pressed by Senator Roger Marshall with basically a yes or no question. Did the research contribute or possibly leak from a lab? Yes or no? And he would not answer.
The question is, could some of the funding you did, you can call it gain of function or not, developing the HLA receptor at the mouse, I'm not sure if you're going to call that gain of function or not, probably not, but could some of the funding indirectly ended up to the contribution of COVID-19?
I'm not sure exactly where that question is going. I mean, you could do research on something as benign as looking at something that has nothing to do with it, and it could indirectly someday, somehow be involved. So if you want to trap me into saying yes or no, I'm not going to play that game.
Well, you should play that game, doctor. I mean, that's literally your job. Did it contribute to it or not? And the lawyerliness of this is what bothers me the most. And unfortunately, the media is turning, and in a way, I almost don't blame them, because do any of these Republicans really care about gain of function? Some of them, maybe. But the rest of them are looking at it as a way to conveniently attack somebody, the hero of the pandemic, who's a right-wing villain, who is Dr. Fauci. Josh Rogan, a journalist I really respect, who wrote a book on this. He was also on Joe Rogan's podcast, and I talked to him a lot about this as well, is that the politicization of this is the worst thing that could ever happen. Yes. Because now Dems are unironically standing and they're like, see, Dr. Fauci schools Rand Paul. I'm like, look, I don't like Rand Paul. Can't stand the guy. Even played a clip of Fauci destroying him about something else here on the show several months ago. But in this particular case, he's right. He's asking the correct questions, and Fauci is the one completely out of step. And the media is defending him.
Yeah, and so, again, part of where this comes from, the media impulse comes from, is the whatever Trump said, we're going to be on the other side of it.
Right.
And then you have the circling of wagons of the scientific community who don't want this research to be questioned because many of them are involved in it. There's a lot of grant money at stake. And so part of why this particular sequence of questioning is really revealing for Dr. Fauci is you kind of start to see why there would be nervousness about going down the rabbit hole of the lab leak hypothesis and actually pulling that thread and seeing where it actually goes. But just so you know that this isn't some crazy right-wing conspiracy anti-Fauci thing, which again, you're right. Most of these people are disingenuous and they just don't like Fauci, and this is a way to attack him. And at the beginning, it was this is a way to blame China, even though as you actually started to dig in.
It's a U.S. thing.
You started to see wait a second, we might be implicated in this as well. So the China direction kind of didn't ultimately really pan out there. But the Dr. Fauci direction is still very much still a live fire exercise for these Republicans who are cynically exploiting it. But there are mainstream journalists who are saying, look, guys, we got to look into this. This shouldn't be political. Just getting to the roots of understanding what happened here should not be political whatsoever. Josh is one of those people. He writes for the Washington Post. He's a CNN contributor. This is not some fringe character who has been investigating and looking into these things. Let's take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say, Josh Rogan, on CNN.
So the Biden administration is open to the idea. They're trying to avoid making it more political. They haven't figured out how to do that yet, but I think you'll see more on that in the coming weeks. Also, there's a bill by Senator Menendez and Senator Risch to demand that the State Department release the intelligence. In other words, the U.S. government is sitting on a bunch of this information. Forget about Fauci for a second. Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and all these guys have this information, and it seems like it should be released, and so we should be able to try to get to the bottom of what actually happened, so that again we can prevent the next pandemic, which is in everyone's interest.
And again, I want to say the Biden administration has been very open to these
They've
lines
been
of
great on
inquiry.
this. It's the media and the Senate Democrats who are the problem.
And they even questioned that World Health Organization report, which the investigatory team was led by one of the people who was implicated in this type of research. Again, there's a lot of wires that get crossed here. They've been very open to that. But I think Josh makes an important point, which is about not just getting to the roots of this pandemic, but the whole treatment of this pandemic from the beginning. The fact that every aspect of it became political in nature, got subsumed into the culture war, everything from mask wearing, other pandemic restrictions. And you still see this now as we're coming out of it and people are getting vaccinations, and there's wildly different approaches to how we should feel about once we are ultimately vaccinated. David Leonhardt had a really important, I think, column in the New York Times laying bare how misguided and misleading some of CDC's guidance ultimately is. Basically, they put out there this number that somewhere around 10% of COVID transmission happens outdoors. Well, it turns out if you dig into those numbers, it is a minuscule, vanishingly small number of COVID transmissions that have happened outside. In fact, it's so small that they don't know of a single case, not just here, but around the world, of casual outdoor transmission, meaning you're walking down the street and you pass by someone, you're close by them out in a park, those sorts of things. Now, there are examples where you're at a crowded stadium, where you're at a Trump rally or something like that, where everybody's
not the same thing.
Packed in together. That's a different deal. But in terms of everyday casual going about your business, walking to your office, walking to a local restaurant or store, 0 documented cases. Again, that doesn't mean there aren't any cases, but the risk that's been documented there is vanishingly small. How is it that this is the first that I'm learning of this, of just how unlikely it is to get COVID from casual outdoor interactions, let alone once you've been vaccinated? I mean, it starts to be completely insane. And the thing is here that people are so worried, they're so nervous after a year that's been extraordinarily traumatizing. Having super clear information about where the risks are and where the risks aren't is exceptionally useful.
Yeah, it's just outrageous. If your business got closed, especially in the middle of June or July, I feel for you, man. Especially with outdoor dining, what they did in Los Angeles and many other places, and the restrictions that were put into place. And you now find this out. I don't even know how you could, how these people can sleep at night if they knew this and what they were propagating. And I understand where it came from, an idea of wanting to control control the public. That failed en masse. It failed whenever it came to this. Our greatest failure. Look, in terms of the general Western world, we actually did fine. Like, not great. And look, like, there was a lot of lives that could have been saved. And I don't want to minimize that. If that happened to your family, I have nothing but sympathy for you. But our greatest failure was just being ripped apart for no reason. Having the politicization of this. We're the only country in the Western world that got further divided because of COVID. How the hell does that happen?
Statement.
A lot of it is Trump's fault, a lot of it. But it's not just him. We were all complicit in that too. And I think that it's the horrific commentary, and all of us will live with the consequences for years to come because of this.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radar, so that's next.